Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. Many of us who are living our lives immersed in the modern technological world are aware that there's a need for soul healing. There's a feeling that there's something missing and something lacking, and that's creating a problem for us. It's diminishing our happiness, our fulfillment, and in the modern era, it can be really hard to put your finger on it because capitalism will do everything it can to sell you a solution that parts you from some amount of money to relieve that feeling of lack of wholeness. And one of the really beautiful things is as we go into the methodologies of indigenous cultures, we start to see our roots. We start to see what created a situation where humans could thrive. And I want to be really clear that there isn't some magical, indigenous people are so much more spiritually advanced or evolved. We have cultures that had really beautiful practices and some that had really problematic practices like human sacrifice, and your tribe status as a woman could look really different from culture to culture. So it's not so much about going back to say, these are the magical source of all wisdom, but people who were living in harmony with the earth, who were spending time outdoors, who were making tribal connections work for them, and who had this fully developed technology or system for dealing with soul health, had some really cool things to teach people in the modern era. And I think that there's a great deal to be said for sitting with the people who've come from that cultural background who are offering their wisdom to people in the modern technological world. That's been a part of my journey, and I think there's a richness and a beauty and a generosity there. And I want to talk in this podcast about plant medicine, specifically things like ayahuasca, peyote, mushrooms, but I'm going to focus on ayahuasca because I think that that's the thing that I get asked the most questions about, the thing that's the most popular. And there's some things that are really useful to know about context and what the effects are before you embark on that. Because I'll be honest, one of the types of clients I often get are people who did ayahuasca and had much more terrible life outcomes subsequently. They ended up feeling vulnerable to entities and unable to function at work, and their level of functioning and well-being declined dramatically. And I believe that if they listened to this podcast and took in the warning labels and accounted appropriately, they could have had the experience potentially successfully, or made a good choice not to have the experience, whichever was right and appropriate for them. So some people are really drawn toward these plant medicines because it was part of their past life history. Their soul remembers how transformative and healing and rich the experience was of being part of a shamanic culture that included those things. And some people are just really seeking, and this dramatic sort of experience where you get to crack open and have this, intense, powerful, potentially amazing experience has a lot of appeal. And so in terms of navigating that, I just want to share some reasons that I think that our ancestors, our indigenous ancestors for whom plant medicine was part of their culture, may have had some better results than modern people. And again, if everyone was having bad results, I wouldn't have the clients that I do. So it's not to say that everyone has terrible results. I don't want to use scare tactics. I don't think those really work anyway. I think the campaigns of the 80s, Just Say No, kind of demonstrated scare tactics didn't really do a whole heck of a lot. But I am really passionate about informed consent, and I think that sometimes people don't get the quality of information to make a good decision for themselves. So I'd really love to help you out with that. So some of the things that are complicated about the modern era when we go to look to our ancestors who lived in harmony with the land before we got into the modern technological era, and I'm all about blending the two. I love the gift of indoor plumbing and being able to not get bit by mosquitoes, and because I have good screens, and having access to modern medicine and clean water and the many, many, many gifts of the modern era. The amazingness of getting to experience different continents in my lifetime, to be able to travel the world in a single lifetime without spending all my time doing it is remarkable. So it's a powerful and amazing time to be alive. And some of the structures of the modern era, if we don't know how to navigate them, create a lot of soul sickness, a lot of spiritual ailment. And I'm very passionate about helping people to heal from that. And I think that some of the place that we're very wisely looking for wisdom is in the indigenous traditions, in the ways of our ancestors that went before. But the challenge is, if we just live to practice out without understanding it fully, then we can end up causing some harm and some problems for ourselves that are unforeseen because it's out of context. So when I talk about shamanism, I'm talking about the practice of core shamanism that is developed by Michael Harner, that's a synergizing of the common elements of shamanism throughout the world that makes it a very universal version. I would never say that I understand a particular Native American nation's meaning around a certain kind of thing, even if I've sat and studied with an indigenous elder from that tradition, because I'm not immersed in it. I don't know the language. I don't know all the traditions. So the complexity of knowing when you've taken something that is life wisdom that's very helpful, and when something comes out of context, is a really nuanced dance when it comes to looking for answers and looking for wisdom among this body of knowledge, which I think has a lot of richness. A really powerful but tragic example of this was a man who decided to sell people this $10,000 or more retreat where he sent them out on his made-up version of a vision quest. This was a Caucasian man who had this very successful business. So he designed this arduous vision quest followed by this arduous sweat lodge, and 5 people died. And it was a very small group, so it was a large percentage who died, and he lost all his money and he went to jail as a result of this. But the problem was he didn't know that he didn't know how to keep people safe. He's like, yes, this is a great thing. I would be very dubious of doing a sweat lodge with anyone who hadn't been trained for a very, very, very long time by an indigenous culture that had that as part of their tradition. It's just too dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, because Native Americans who have that as part of their tradition aren't getting those results of killing people because they don't understand the limits of the human body. There's a wisdom and a knowledge that's held with that. And so when it comes to ayahuasca, some of what I've been shown by my guides and I've been given to understand about that and other kinds of plant medicine is that there are some contexts that are really important for how it's used in indigenous cultures. So one of those contexts is it's immersed in a shamanic society. So there are all these tribal rituals of tribal dance, tribal song, listening to drums, going through initiations. There's this richness of engaging with shamanic practices independent of plant medicine, of which you would have had a great deal of experience as a member of a tribe that used this as part of their initiations. My guides have also said that indigenous people who use this within their culture tended to take smaller doses. They didn't need as much because they already knew how to access the unseen world in some powerful ways. They also were immersed in community. So if somebody had something go wrong, if they didn't get their roots back in the ground, if their chakras started to pull up because their body thought they were dying, they would notice there were people with the sight who could check on your energy field weeks and months afterwards and make sure it was in the right place. And if you had a healthy tribal society with the right shaman who was taking care of the people and holding the container, ideally you would never end up with anyone who could achieve the level of soul sickness and disconnection from themselves and disconnection from the natural principles as we can end up in the modern era. There would be someone literally tending and guarding and supervising the well-being of your spirit in a really effective way as a natural part of the community. So just to be clear, I call myself a shamanic practitioner, not a shaman, partly because I don't have that accountability. I work with people individually, but I don't have guardianship of their spiritual well-being. So for many reasons, that being one of them, I don't use that term to describe myself or my work. And I would argue that per capita, the people with the ability to do shamanic work is lower in the world than it's ever been. And so we've lost the right number of people putting eyes on people to see if they're okay at the spiritual level with the skill set to intervene if they're not. And that's a complicated part of the modern era. Indigenous people also had restorative time in nature and they knew context. So if you had this massive take apart, you would be in the restorative principle of nature for coming back into the life cycle, for being human. You'd spend a lot of time outdoors. And you'd be dealing with people with massive experience. So if you had an odd, different experience, then you'd have people that could help you out with that. So for a lot of reasons, the downsides and the challenges that I see among my clients who come to me because they're not recovering after ayahuasca or peyote or a lot of mushroom use are not showing up as much in indigenous societies that have all this context. So in the modern era, let's say you're like, no, in my heart of hearts, I really feel called to this. This really, really feels like the right thing for me. I honor that. Like we get to be at choice. And I want to help you to have some discernment in terms of how to frame the experience for yourself so you have a better chance of results. And if you tune into this and you're kind of on the fence, should I, shouldn't I, would this help, wouldn't it? You might want to explore some other avenues of healing before or in addition to seeking out plant medicine. So one of the things that I think is really important to know is expect that there will be months of rehabilitation and integration on the other side. So this can do a lot of damage to your energy body, and it can take down the barrier that naturally keeps your awareness not inadvertently seeing things in shamanic reality, in the energetic reality of things. So it's wonderful to access those. And as a shamanic practitioner, I've trained myself to listen to a drum and go into an altered state and perceive the energetic truth of things. But I don't do that while I'm driving. And it's completely under my volitional control. And sometimes people after ayahuasca, because they've opened up that awareness by putting something in their body, it doesn't go back to the right configuration, and they're a little debilitated for the same reason someone who's schizophrenic might be. Because I would argue that someone who has schizophrenia, the barrier that lets them focus on the correct reality in the correct moment is not under their volitional control. And that's a really important piece of that. So sometimes the barrier doesn't go back up properly. So if you're expecting that you will be doing Qigong and energy body rehabilitation on the other side of it and commit the daily practice of that, your outcomes are going to be a lot better. I would also so encourage you not to have it be the first thing you do. Learn shamanic journeying, develop practices, learn to sense your energy field. That way, if something goes wrong, you'll be able to track it, because sometimes people have these experiences, they're quite injured by them, and they just don't have the expertise to be able to read their own energy field. So you should be able to completely sober and in a normal moment take a few breaths and feel what's going on with your energy body before you seek this out. And I would argue that all the soul healing that we can do that is gentler, that doesn't have rehabilitation of your energy field, that doesn't dismantle good energy systems as well as the problematic ones, is kind of a kinder, gentler path. So people who do soul retrieval sessions with me and shamanic healing sessions, I can extract heavy energy and patterns and past lives, but I'm not going to impair their functioning or leave them cracked open. Discernment about who you get as a facilitator is really important. Large groups can leave you vulnerable to intrusion and taking on awful stuff that other people are releasing, and it doesn't necessarily have the presence to be able to make sure that you're all right. So high doses, large groups, non-indigenous space holders, people who've only been doing it for a short time, people whose life results just aren't that good. Pay attention to, how effective the person is being in their lives. Because I know there's sort of a culture of people who really love it, but on the other side, if you make it 10 times harder to be able to trade your time and talent for money, and it becomes way, way, way harder to hold down a job, that can make it really hard to function in the modern era. So you ideally want to have this be something that has the outcome of making you more effective in your life, not dramatically less so. So smaller groups are good. And does the experience involve check-ins and follow-up and deep facilitation? Are you getting exercises for how to rehabilitate your energy field? Do you do shamanic work before, as in months leading up to the experience, and after, as in months afterwards? So when people are putting it in programs like that, they have a very deep, clear understanding of what it means to go through this kind of thing. If the only cautionary warning labels you're getting are how much you might throw up, you probably have somebody who doesn't understand the plant medicine deeply enough outside of the individual experience. So they may be able to keep you safe through the individual experience, but they won't be able to help you integrate it. And this is a really vital part of what tribal societies would do. The initiations were part of the flow of life, and so it was integrated into a greater fabric. It wasn't just like, great weekend, good luck, leave me a review. It was this continuity of space holding. You would still have someone taking care of you. Now, if you're a very advanced practitioner, you can totally hold space for yourself. So if you're excellent at shamanic journey, you've consulted with your guides, you feel really called, you feel like it's the right opportunity, you know how to track your own energy field, you know how to repair damage, no problem. You don't need as much space holding. You can, hold your own container. But a lot of people who go into it don't have that mastery, and it leaves them very vulnerable. So a lot of discernment for that is super helpful. So all of this is to say that if it's something that for you as a deeply committed practitioner who's done a lot of study, really developed your abilities, and this feels like a congruent next step or experience that you would like to weave in, then I believe, that's totally available to you. And those are not the people that I see whose lives have kind of been crashed and dismantled by this experience. But if you're just looking for, kind of an off-the-shelf quick experience, it can be really harsh beyond what it does to your body. So part of what these plant medicines can do, especially Ayahuasca, which is, known as the death vine, it can cause your energy to begin to pull up your central channel because your body thinks you're dying. So all the chakras, the root chakra goes into the sacral chakra, the combined two chakras integrate with the solar plexus, and so on until it meets the crown chakra. And then the soul transitions to upper world where it reintegrates with the higher self. This is what happens when we die. And certain drugs, including ayahuasca, also cocaine, meth, things like that, can produce an effect where the energy body starts its journey to the other side, but you don't actually die. And if you don't get your chakras put back and reconfigured to be human, and your connection to the earth reestablished afterward, you're going to have a heck of a lot of problems. There's a lot of physical illness that happens, a lot of autoimmune disorders, a lot of soul loss, a lot of challenge with finances, very, very, very hard to earn a job, a lot of just trouble even having a normal conversation and having people understand you, or being able to be in right relationship with time, because when you're that in the other side, your sense of time is going to go really wonky. So I know my sense of time goes wonky when I do shamanic journey work. I organize things around where I don't have to be in harmony with time if I'm going to do deep practice. And so you don't want to lose your ability to function really effectively as a modern human. The other part of it is this is huge take-apart medicine. And to me, to be on the shamanic path means a lot of take apart, and that serves me really well. It dismantles old systems and maladaptive behavior and old past life pain. There's sort of a continual take apart process, and it's not very comfortable when it's happening. I love having fellow shamanic practitioners so I can just tell them I'm having a take apart day, and they'll know that nothing is fundamentally wrong, but I'm also super uncomfortable. So it's like, congratulations and condolences. I hear you. I love you. This too shall pass. But small doses of take apart, when you dismantle things over time, can keep your whole world from reorganizing all at once. And sometimes it's just good. Sometimes it's just good if you're on a destiny path that you're really having trouble breaking off of, to have a really big take apart. And again, the people who do extended programs with months of training and facilitation on either side are probably the ones that can help you assess and do the work that supports it so it's productive rather than just traumatic, because take apart can also take apart things that are working really well, like your ability to interface with the world in a normal way. But it's also really uncomfortable on the other side. As I shared in another podcast, I did San Pedro on one occasion, and I didn't have a single client book for 3 weeks. And it's the only time in over 20 years of practice where I had open spaces that I wanted to have filled, because, it was at that point, I transitioned into it being my full-time livelihood, where no one signed up. And it was okay. I got by on credit cards and all of that, but it just dismantled something really vital about my ability to trade my gifts for money in an effective system for a while. And I was quite advanced and skillful as a shamanic practitioner, so I was able to put myself back together and it was all fine, but it was quite expensive experientially and literally. And some of the people I work with have just not been able to function in normal jobs when they were having success with that before they had the experience. So if you're feeling this kind of soul sickness and disengagement and sense that the world is all gray and low-level depression and lack of life wish, I get it. I work with a lot of people who have that going on, and I believe it's chronic. I believe there's so many people suffering from that experience, because the modern era, if you don't use it in a really aligned way, like we have all these gifts, we have all this abundance, but we don't always have the self-knowledge of how to tend and care for some really important aspects of our being in order to thrive, to have all the good that tribal societies had and all the good and the freedom that is available in being part of the modern era. We have these amazing long lives that our ancestors didn't have potentially, and access to so much freedom and so much choice and so much opportunity to find a tribe that's really functional. There's so much available, and yet a lot of people just don't know how to take care of themselves in a way. And so I would just offer that it might not feel like the quick magical solution that something like a dramatic weekend in Peru might, but there's deep healing available. And so soul retrieval and shamanic healing, which I do, magnificent for shifting those kind of problems, and it's not going to crash other things in your life. It'll create change, and often very quick change, potentially, if you so choose. I've certainly had times when something wanted to move and I used my free will to fight it tooth and nail, so we're always at choice. And then other things that are really restorative, looking to practices like Qigong and yoga and meditation. They're marvelous ways to access deep wisdom and deep healing and really tend the spirit and tend the energy body. Also, time in nature. I love being able to sleep in a bed with no bugs biting me in the night, like yay. And there's a lot of outcomes that are improved if humans get enough time in nature, or even turn on the window channel and stream something where someone's just set up a camera on a beach or in front of a waterfall and film the sunset, because even looking at images of nature, especially ones that have sound and movement associated with them, can make a big difference, because you might be in a part of the world where currently the temperatures are in negative numbers, so going and sitting with a tree and letting it restore you is not particularly accessible in this moment, and that's valid. But there's a lot of ways to restore the spirit that don't involve plant medicine, and if it's really the right thing for you, expect it to have a high price of admission beyond the potential for throwing up, beyond the intensity of the physical experience, beyond whatever money you pay to the person who's holding space. There's a price to that kind of healing that is higher for someone in the modern era who doesn't have all of the advantages that someone who's part of a culture that knows this medicine very well and uses it as one of many strategies within a tribe. So account for that. Make plans to tend yourself afterwards so that you can, get the benefit but not do anything that crashes your ability to function in the modern world and earn the money that you need to earn. And frankly, be free of being frightened all the time, because entity attachment is a very, very common outcome that I see for people who've done ayahuasca. And if you're energetically sensitive, that can be really, really frightening. And so I just would love to support you in knowing the things you need to know to choose in a really aligned way for yourself. And in your heart of hearts, this may be something that you're like, I feel so drawn to this. And in that case, use this information to take good care of yourself. And if you're someone who's on the fence, who's like, it might work, I don't know, I kind of get a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, but this other person said it was really great for them, I really want the results they're describing, I would just invite you to explore other options before you reach for that. But if it really is heart and soul, a congruent yes, you feel it profoundly as something that's the right thing for you, just do the work around it to make sure that you have the right experience, discernment of who you get to facilitate you through, and expect to do the care of yourself before and after, and have it be part of other ways of connecting with spirit. I think people go really off course when this is the only way or the primary way they're using to get in touch with spirit, because if they're not accessing it with practices that are available on a daily basis, that soul sickness we're talking about just can start to build up again. And the body is not equipped to do ayahuasca every weekend, at least in my experience. There may be people I've just never heard of who are like, it's the best thing ever. What is this crazy California girl saying about this? She's wrong. I tell you, wrong. I know people can be really passionate about their experiences. So I honor wherever you are with it, but I hope that this gives you some additional information to navigate this kind of choice about your spiritual journey. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.